and do
Sorry. Didn't mean for the lady to talk over you, Laura. Sorry.
that. All right, I'm done.
Great. Thank you, Laura. So I will ask you all to mute yourselves and take no offense if we mute you later, if you somehow get unmuted. But I would like to introduce Julie Burchett. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Burchett.
Burchett? Okay, thank you. She is going to give us an overview of what's going on in the world of disinformation. And thank you so much, Julie, for coming to talk to us.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to spotlight you.
Share my screen. Do you guys see my screen?
Let me give you permission to share. There you go. You should be able to now. Yes, we can see it.
Yep. Got it. Okay, good. All right. Well, this is just an overview of misinformation, disinformation, and trying to manipulate people. And for some of you that were on a little bit earlier, Jennifer Lohman, who chairs this committee, was talking about, the big bad actors that are out there. But that's not the only place where misinformation, disinformation is coming from. It can come from just about anywhere. All right. There we go. Okay, so these are the main topics we need to know before we get started into details about things. So there's three main topics that we're going to cover. So misinformation, and I'll tell you what that means, disinformation, and then manipulation.
Julie,
Okay.
Julie, I think we're seeing the wrong slides right now.
It says misinformation.
Yeah, I think those are Gina's slides. There we go. We're good.
Are we good? Do you guys all see a slide that says misinformation?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, good. Okay, so misinformation is not done on purpose. It's information that goes out. People may be trying to do a good deed and tell people something that they think is important, but it's mistakenly wrong, and they're not doing it on purpose. It's an honest error. I know I've done that. I know, we probably all have done that. It's spread inadvertently. Disinformation, on the other hand, is where it is a deliberate attempt to spread information. So like bad information, it's like fake news, all those conspiracy theories that we all see out there, bad information. I mean, just we all have all seen some outright lies that are out there. So it's a deliberate attempt to spread this information. A couple of examples, you've all seen out there probably COVID isn't real, especially, a while back. The vaccine implants microchips in people. We've heard about that, and of course the big lie. And then we have manipulation. It does not rely on disinformation. It uses real, real genuine information or circumstances or possible controversies to make emotional appeals to get people to feel one way or the other about something that's going on. And they really use that to influence how people make decisions. So this little map here shows social media manipulation. And you can see that there's organized social media manipulation campaigns in 70 countries around the world. This was evidence from 2019. So I'm sure there's more than that now. So it is out there. People are organized and they are doing this. Who spreads it? Well, people spread it, organizations spread it, people within our country spread it. We know people outside our country spread it. It can be politicians, it can be celebrities, it can be journalists, it can be authors. Anybody who's got a platform out there can spread disinformation. Now we're going to talk about where you can see and hear it, but I put beware very big because it is everywhere and we have to be very diligent in watching out for it. So obviously the first thing, social media, all the platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, Twitch, many more. We are bombarded by information all day, every day. So this is one place we definitely need to watch, because this is one place that it's used a lot. And this is one I really hadn't thought about until I started researching this, is gaming sites and systems. I mean, I know I don't do this as much, but I have sons that are on gaming sites all the time. And in addition to just playing the game, you can also talk to the other people that are playing the game with you, or post things about whatever's going on. And they could be playing the game, but they're also talking about whatever, and it could be spreading misinformation or disinformation. Of course, we've got YouTube, okay? Not everything on YouTube is true. Be aware of that and watch that when you're on there. Many partisan online media blogs, like HuffPost. The GP is down there. It's from here in St. Louis, and it's a right-wing blog. So when you're reading people's information, you got to kind of check and see if what their bias is, and if they could be spreading misinformation or disinformation. And then of course we have chat platforms, WhatsApp, Nextdoor, GroupMe, Nextdoor, neighborhood and community group chats. I'm sure everybody belongs to one or two of those. And this is more of what people probably would be doing misinformation. These are probably not the big actors trying to put big lies out there, but just spreading misinformation inadvertently. And then of course we've got just our personal interactions. When you talk to people, when you run into somebody at the grocery store and stop and talk, that can be a source of misinformation. And of course our emails, we get stuff from all kinds of people, not just our friends that we trust. So that is another place to be aware that it could be coming. Other things to kind of watch out for. It is so prevalent today and people are so good at this, and it makes it so easy now. Artificial intelligence and all these advanced editing techniques. There can be fake video images out from a real image, but then they add to it or take away from it or whatever, and it can be out within literally seconds of the original photo or video. So that is something to be aware of. Even if it looks like it's legit, it might be edited or altered in some kind of way. And then of course we've got the artificial amplification, where it seems like there's a message or some information out there everywhere. So the people with fake accounts, and there's lots of them, that's what we refer to as the bots, and the organizations behind those people, they can get a piece of information that they are misinformation or disinformation that they want out there, and give it to all their bots, and within seconds, it's out there to thousands and thousands and millions of people, and then other people start spreading it as well. Okay, other things to watch for: false equivalency. I have a picture of Dr. Fauci out there and a picture of a horse, because Dr. Fauci knows a lot about viruses and COVID. He's studied it for years. He's like the leading expert in our country. But there was a farmer who took a little 1 month course on how to treat his horses on his horse farm with different kinds of drugs or whatever if the horses were sick. They will sometimes compare, the farmer will compare to Dr. Fauci and put them in the same context. Well, okay, who are you going to believe and who are you going to listen to? Some farmer who believes in ivermectin and says, okay, go ahead and drink it for the COVID. Or Dr. Fauci, who's got, expertise out the wazoo. And then also distraction. So, I know I do this all the time, and I try not to, but I do. Once you look at something on the internet or basically anywhere, you can start, you start clicking on other things. It gives you other things, like you might be interested in this or this, and you start going down that rabbit hole and finding different things that may or may not be true. Other things to watch out for: we've got projection. That's to assume that everybody is kind of thinking like you. So this is where I'm sure you guys have heard about on Facebook and all the social media platforms. They have these algorithms that look at what you are looking at. and where you're, what you're posting and what you're interested in, and it's got all of that, and it will feed stuff into you that is something that you are interested in or that you show support for. You don't tend to see other points of view. So if you just go by that, you think, oh my gosh, this is all going on and this looks great, or this doesn't look great, when in fact it may not be that one-sided. And then the last thing here is, if you see those little warning signs, okay, that they put those there and they're trying to do that more, means that the content could be disturbing or it could be harmful. But that means when you see that, it means that the fact checkers, and they do have fact checkers, dispute those claims. And then usually they will point you to some better information that is not disinformation. Okay, other things to watch out for. There's fake news websites out there. There's fake social media accounts out there. There's hoax websites out there, you know, that looks like a legit website, but it's like totally wrong. Propaganda sites that may look legit. And then you got to watch for satirical websites too. I mean, I love The Onion. I've got a picture of The Onion down there. It's kind of funny. But, you know, I've known people to think that that is like real news and take it that way and spread that information. And that is the end of mine.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
A great introduction. And let me take you off spotlight because, and if you'll stop sharing your screen,
Okay.
then I would like to introduce Dr. Gina McLendon, who is going to talk about manipulation in the context of its effect on communities of color. So let me spotlight her, and you can go ahead and unmute if you would, Dr. McLendon. We seem to have a technical glitch. I think I can hear you. I think you're good now.
Okay, yeah, it was giving me a few problems here. I'm very spoiled. I'm only using one computer screen, so bear with me. Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this important topic. So I'm just going to take a deeper dive into manipulation and what it is. And so, as Julie said, it's factual information, but it's that which is taken out of context and presented to cause harm. It's based in fact, but used out of context to mislead people. So, for example, inauthentic content, either by audio or video, it grabs the attention of the audience and is repeatedly shared. So, one example might be a particular TV channel will play something that will grab your attention. It grabs your attention. It might be about farming. It might be about school. It might be about many things, but what they're doing is manipulating you into getting into whatever it is they want you to get into. And it's real easy to do that. The content can be cheap fake or deep fake. So cheap fake is real audio clips and videos that have been sped down or slowed down to show out of context to mislead. Deep fake, on the other hand, is very believable audio and video and is crafted to deceive people. Also, manipulation was used in great effect in 2016. I didn't know that. I didn't realize that it was that many years ago, and it probably goes back farther than that. It targets vulnerable voters who can be convinced to stay home. An example of that is they will put up information about voting. So let's say the election is on November the 8th, Tuesday, November the 8th. They could manipulate you and say the election is Wednesday, November the 8th. that kind of stuff. Manipulation amplifies genuine controversies and real areas of disagreement and discontent. It's a process of process of increasing volume or sound. So, and it's made or produced by human beings rather than occurring naturally. So again, think about this in terms of audio and video. You can take audio and amplify it, and it can manipulate you. If it's going slow, if it's going fast, in your mind, you're following whatever it is they want you to do, and you're not thinking about it. Go to the next slide. Here's ways to spot it. So if it's emotionally charged and a divisive topic, it will grab your attention.
Dr. McLendon, we're not seeing your slides. I didn't realize you had slides. Have you shared your screen? I'm sorry to interrupt, but.
Oh, okay. I guess I didn't. Sorry about that.
Right. There, we've got them now. Thank you.
Okay. Well, it works better with slides. Sorry about that. Got a little anxious, I guess. So ways to spot it, again, it's emotionally charged and divisive topics. The way to spot it is to understand the landscape of disinformation, misinformation, and malinformation. So you need to understand what it is. So social media will reproduce dependence on it creates a way for us to reduce the dependence on social media. It exercises skepticism. So you can take all the news sources with a bit of doubt and believe it. That's another way of manipulation. Another one is investigate what you're reading or seeing. So you have to check your sources because you never know if it's true or not. Here's an example of manipulation. So this is a young man, work done. His mom is a New Orleans police officer who was shot and killed while he was in high school. So he raised his siblings while in college and graduated and went on to the NFL. They said he built and paid for over 145 houses for single mothers, sacrificing millions of dollars. Now that is an inspirational post that people will believe, but it's not true. So you have to be vigilant, you have to be skeptical at all times. So the next slide, avoiding manipulation. Don't follow the meme heavy or inspirational accounts. I'll go back to the example that I gave, and I'll just call it what it is, but Fox News will play something very inspirational that will get you excited and make you believe whatever it is that's going on. And then they'll come back with some other information, and you will go from being inspired to believing the next segment of whatever it is that they're posting. So you have to be aware of that. Another way to avoid is to disable notifications. Never, ever click on recommended content, and never join groups or forums that are suggested by the platform. And it's easy to do. I can't tell you how many text messages I get where people are saying, you've won $200, click this link so you can get it. Whatever you do, don't ever do that, because it's a way to get your information and a way to manipulate you. Be very wary of accounts that post content aligning with the outer edges of our belief system. So you may believe something, whatever your belief system is, but the content that they're giving you sounds so good that you're questioning your own belief system. So you have to be aware of that. Counteractive manipulative content is intended to deter voters with affirmative messages like the one on this slide. Can you see the one that's on the slide? The only thing we have to fear is how easily I can make you afraid. How about that?
Yes.
So here's the focus on colors of communities of color. This sort of manipulation happens consistently and constantly with African Americans or communities of color in general. And I think it has a lot to do with this idea of manipulating how we think. So as an African American person, I'm already skeptical about everything that people in power do. So for some people, it wouldn't take much to do or say something that I might believe. For example, I have a brother who doesn't believe in getting COVID shots. Well, he's getting all his information from one source. And so we're taking that source and it's just going on and on and on. Are you seeing the screen with the people on it?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not sure how to get rid of that. I'm sorry. So here's another example of what this looks like. So some accounts have actually been suspended. So these are the things that you want to look out for. Like for the one that's on the left, more than a vote, that's a fake account. There are others that kind of do the same thing, but you look for the warning signs. Like for example, we've got on the right that Trump and the basketball star LeBron James are best friends. Well, if you're thinking about this, you would know, or if you know anything about LeBron James, that he is not best friends with Trump. And this is a true story that went out. And so in closing, I think what we most want to be able to do is just remember the blue check mark or verified accounts. If you can't verify it yourself, then it's not a trustworthy post. And it's just that simple. And then there are a couple of references here. And that is my presentation.
All right, thank you. If you'll stop sharing your screen, thank you very much for that. It was very informative. Next we have Caroline Fan, who's talk about non-English language disinformation. So if you'll unmute, I will spotlight you. And
Good morning. I hope that this goes better than last time, but I need to share a video. Okay, hopefully that's the right one.
we can see the video. We can't share,
Okay.
can't hear it at this point.
Okay, cool. Let me. Okay, hang on. Sorry.
When you, hey
Oh, yeah,
Caroline,
when
when
I
you're
share
hitting
the
show,
screen.
you gotta
Yes.
check the checkbox for
Yes.
audio.
Thank you. Okay, let's try this.
We spend the most time on social media globally. And as we found out, lies laced with anger and hate spread fastest. When you only look at content, it's a whack-a-mole game. I want to figure out what the lie is, then look at the network that spreads the lies. That's the nervous system. We started looking at one account that was attacking all journalists are corrupt. One account that had 25 followers. They were all following each other. We fact-checked every single item. These were all fake accounts. We began to count and found that 26 fake accounts can influence up to 3 million other accounts. 3 million. I think the first attacks, this word prostitutes, you can even track this word. Mocha Uson starts to popularize prostitutes and
So that's Maria Ressa, who just received the Nobel Prize in the Philippines. And the reason why I begin with that video is to give a sense of how misinformation and disinformation in other communities spreads from other countries to here, right? From, I think, what is it, 26 accounts to 3 million people? That's one of the ways, right? So people are in, let me pull up my other screen. People are in WeChat groups and in other communications forums with people from other countries, and both in English, in Spanish, and in multiple languages. That's one of the ways that all of this transmits. And where did I put my, oh, here. So, sorry, I clearly need a lot of audiovisual help.
You're doing fine. We're a patient bunch.
Okay, sorry about this. You know what? I think it's better if I go into, yeah, and then I also have to give Sal's presentation because he is celebrating his wife's birthday. So, oh, here. Okay, you know what? Sorry. Okay, here we go. So I founded an organization called the Missouri Asian American Youth Foundation here as the first statewide ANHPI organization to focus on advocacy and civil engagement. And the Philippines, right, is a testing ground. And this is what she discovered in conversation with the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower. What he said to her really was, the reason that we use the Philippines is because the protocols, the regulations are so lax. And then we take what we've learned from the Philippines, we bring it over to the US. So here are some of the social media platforms that are in various Asian languages. This is not, all of them, but you have Weibo, you have WeChat, you have KakaoTalk, you have Line, you have Viber, and of course you have our favorite, which is Facebook. Most of these are closed groups, right? You cannot enter if someone within the group has not invited you. And so the process of attacking disinfo and misinfo, whether it's about vaccines or elections, is difficult. And within the AANHPI community, we've been relying upon largely first gen and 1.5 gen folks who are very fluent, who are able to address all of the misinfo and disinfo. So another way that misinfo and disinfo happens in AANHPI communities is via ethnic media, but ethnic media is also probably one of our best ways of combating it. So in my national Asian American press list, I have over 1,000 contacts, right? I think in the state of Missouri, there's 4 Chinese language papers, including the Kansas City Chinese Journal, which is also owned by the St. Louis Chinese Journal. There's an edition of the World Journal, which is a national Chinese paper. And then there's a Korean paper and a Vietnamese magazine that's monthly here in the St. Louis area. But who really reaches out to the ethnic media, whether it's local, state, federal governments? It doesn't happen a ton. It tends to happen around the census. When I was on the governor's complete counts committee, I was able to successfully get the state to pay for the first time in history, at census ads in Chinese and Spanish in Kansas City and in St. Louis. And I want to give that due credit because I think that's a good step forward, right? And so one of the things that happens because of the lack of, translation, despite Title VI, which is a federal, statute, is that groups like mine wind up having to do a tremendous amount of education in multiple languages, including mailers, right? So for the last 7.5 years, I've been running nonpartisan voter outreach to our communities in multiple languages. And it is very time intensive. And this past November 2020 election, frankly, it was very confusing for a lot of folks to figure out how to vote in English, right? Much less other languages. And so we did a phone bank to folks across the state. And what a lot of people said to us is, one, they didn't know they could vote ahead of the election. Two, in the St. Louis County area, they didn't know that there were these early satellite voting locations that they could go to. One person was like, wait, you mean I don't have to wait till Tuesday? I can go tomorrow. It's like, yes. And by the way, here's a location that is closest to you. So doing all of this work is heavily time intensive, and yet is critical, because otherwise folks don't know what they don't know, right? I remember when we first started the phone banking in 2014, we called a Vietnamese speaking voter, and she thought that she had to re-register for every election, right? So there's a lot of stuff that folks just need addressed. And then the other thing I want to bring up is that, sorry, I'll stop sharing temporarily while I pull up Sal's. Currently within Missouri, right, the API population alone or in combination is something like 3%. The Latino Hispanic population is about 5%. So that's 8% of the state. However, right, it doesn't, in terms of how information is communicated or not communicated to our communities, that's not how it feels. And where's Sal's? Here. I have. Okay, so this portion focuses in on the Spanish language, disinformation and misinformation. This is the national demographics based upon Census 2020. And, Latinos are a very fast growing part of the population. So in Missouri, right, Sal likes to talk about this key number, which is 11,779 votes, which is the margin of the presidential victory in Georgia. And there are 125,000 eligible Latino voters in Missouri, right? So it far exceeds that margin. And in Georgia, that victory was achieved through vigorous outreach by communities of color to their communities in multiple languages. So these are the most common non-English languages in Missouri. So Spanish, followed by Chinese, German, Serbo-Croatian, Arabic, French, Vietnamese, and Tagalog. Disinformation proliferates online and is often shared on WhatsApp, which is really popular amongst Latino immigrants, right? So Asian Americans also use WhatsApp, and disinfo populates there to the degree that Unidos USA, which is the largest Hispanic civil rights advocacy organization, decided to sever ties to Facebook because they wanted to really highlight how much of an impact the hate and misinfo on Facebook has had on the Latinx community. The Nielsen report shows that Latino audiences are more likely to receive, consume, and share fake news and misinformation online as compared to the general population. I will say that we have a very dear friend of ours from college whose husband wound up getting into an argument with my husband, who is an infectious disease expert. And it was clear that he had somehow absorbed some disinfo because he was saying that the vaccine would change your genome, which is not true, right? So this proliferation of misinfo and disinfo in Spanish, again, is not just about the vaccine, is not just about the election. It's really, unfortunately, endemic. And then Sal has helpfully provided some resources. Yes, I think I will pause here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was a lot of information. Next we have Debbie Kitchen, who will be actually recorded. So we're going to get to watch the presentation that she did earlier. So let me, Julie, I'm sorry, I got to chat. Julie, that's you who's going to play that video. Is that correct? Oh, let me look in chat. Oh, Jennifer. Okay, so let me get Jennifer spotlighted real quick.
Hey, thanks. Thanks so much. I'm just gonna play her video here and make sure that I've
Sorry,
got it up in the right place.
okay, give me 1 second
Okay.
to get your you spotlighted. I know. Sorry, Jim. You were right below Jennifer, and so my clicking isn't so accurate. All right, we're ready to go. Thank you, Jennifer.
Okay, thanks. I am actually trying to pull. Okay, there we are. I've got it here, and I'm going to share sound. Make sure I've got the right thing, because it's very hard. The background looks the same, and I'm wearing only a slightly different shirt, so it's hard to tell the difference between my current screen and this one. So here it goes. Debbie Kitchen, who is going to tell us all about rural Missouri.
I don't think we're
Debbie, we're not hearing you.
Audio.
Thank you. So let's start with the information desert, which the rural communities in Missouri certainly are. Their newspapers are no longer daily newspapers. They get a paper maybe 3 times a week and on Sunday in most of the small towns. And it's whether the papers are owned by a conglomerate or a local operator, their sparse news content is tailored to the desires of the advertisers, who are often highly influenced by other media, such as extremist talk radio. Then we also have the lack of unbiased straight news. Our local TV stations are right-leaning and coverage is biased as a result. Many people also rely on Fox, OANN, and Newsmax cable channels because that's what their friends and family are watching. The Brainwashing of My Dad is a documentary that I recommend every Missourian watches. It shows the progression of what happens to someone whose media influence is suddenly limited to extremist talk radio in the car and Fox on the TV at home. And rural Missouri is full of this mindset. Well, in 1987, Congress abolished the Fairness Doctrine, and we had the development of right talk radio, extremist right talk radio develop as a result. And this is the king of right talk radio. The Fairness Doctrine had two basic elements. It required broadcasters to devote some of their airtime to discussing controversial matters of public interest and to air contrasting views regarding those matters. Stations were given wide latitude as to how to provide contrasting views. It could be done through news segments, public affairs shows, or editorials. The doctrine did not require equal time for opposing views, but required that contrasting viewpoints be presented. The demise of this FCC rule has been considered by some to be a contributing factor for the rising level of political polarization in the United States. So now we have extremist talk radio. It is the most used medium in the rural parts of our state, in part because the FM music stations do not have the same rural reach as AM talk radio stations. And Rush Limbaugh's influence in this area definitely lingers. This is where the disinformation mindset begins for many folks in rural Missouri. In addition to the AM stations, they air syndicated right-wing shows. And now Missouri has 3 extreme right FM talk stations replacing Rush: The Patriot, KRTX, and News Talk STL. So right radio began on AM stations, which had an immense reach in rural areas. Then they moved to FM. Now they're on satellite radio. So no matter your location, you can find extremist talk radio, which has been proven to be very addictive. The Talk Radio Project has started, and it is training folks to be able to call in to these extremist shows and discuss truthful information with a different message. Now, if any of us in this webinar are interested, you can email talkradioproject@gmail.com to be interviewed for a spot in the group. I am part of that group, and my co-member, Richard, did a call in to Hoppy Kercheval in West Virginia. He has a right talk show, and I want to give you a sample of how we're combating some of these messages. This was a call in on S1. If I can get my computer to cooperate, here we go.
Richard, Richard Wetcherstein.
Hey, Hoppy.
Hey.
Great program.
Thank you.
Got to agree with the previous caller. Protecting our sacred right to vote should be job one for all state and county officials. When I reach into my wallet, I find a West Virginia driver's license. But if I lived in a city, or I had a disability, or I just get too old, I might not have that license. Of course, if it was automatic registration, when I got that license, like they do it in Virginia, I would save all those officials one whole bunch of paperwork. You seem all worried about same-day registration. Tough on a rural state. Well, take one of those officials off fishing permits for a few days, Hoppy. We're a rural state, but we've got computers. If a citizen swears they are eligible, put their vote in the provisional pile while it's being checked. Call Joe Manchin, tell him, For the People Act protects us all.
You got it, sir. Thank you.
So as you can see, we had a successful call in there. Now, bear with me. So after everybody has listened to the radio show and the TV programs in the morning, the retired old timers meet down at the coffee shop every morning to have coffee and conversation. Now, they're just as likely to discuss the latest conspiracy theories as they are the local stories that they recently heard at the local filling station or cafe, beauty shop, or barber shop. So lots of disinformation and manipulative information is spread this way in small towns. Unfortunately, churches can be significant, persuasive sources of misinformation, disinformation, and manipulation. The lives of many rural people center around their church, and churches have considerable influence on their congregations, whether they're telling them how to vote, telling them not to vote, are turning a health or political issue into a religious one. Faith trends, such as the rise of the prosperity gospel, also affect the underlying doctrine of rural evangelical churches. And we all know the guy, I do my own research. In rural areas where everyone knows everyone else, there is a significant amount of peer pressure to conform to common community beliefs. People are afraid to risk alienating their friends, family, pastor, or employer because they can't risk their community standing, church membership, or employment over socio-political views. This has even led to the documented rural phenomenon of people being secretly vaccinated against COVID rather than openly admitting to believing government recommendations. Sometimes rampant misinformation, disinformation, and manipulation can be traced back to a trusted, influential member of the community who fell prey to that content, who can sometimes ironically be the one who died from COVID because he did his own research. Did you know also in rural areas, people are just suspicious of outsiders. They reject the idea of being told what to do by non-locals. There is an inherent and much exploited negativity towards cities and city people, as well as a fundamentally negative view of government. So the distrust and stereotypes present a barrier to authentic engagement. That's why deep canvassing must be a serious consideration for all nonpartisan groups doing any kind of work in rural Missouri. Rural doesn't mean white. Rural is an identity, not just a geography, but it isn't racially or ethnically monolithic. While rural America is 20% more white than urban America, there is much more racial and ethnic diversity than some might assume. 1 in 5 rural voters is a person of color, and barriers to the ballot box can affect them even more keenly than their suburban and urban counterparts. So in closing, Josephine Lucato, a professor of journalism and media at the University of Texas at Austin, said it's not just the wider world of social media, but also location-specific platforms like neighborhood Facebook groups and nextdoor.com pages where disinformation and misinformation can be spread. Those posts can also make the jump from the internet to the real life conversations where false information can spread even further and leave a greater impression of credibility. Quote, "We tend to trust what our close network of friends and families say. It's really different when we hear it from an anonymous Twitter account versus a close friend." Due to the time constraint this evening, I put together a resource page for you to go and do more reading on misinformation, disinformation, and manipulation in rural Missouri. Thank you so much for letting me present this evening.
So there you go. That was Debbie. Somebody did ask a quick question. What is deep canvassing? And I think deep canvassing is something like more intensive than just going around and asking about a particular candidate or issue. You actually go and ask people what they're concerned about and why they're concerned about it and what the bases for their belief systems are. So it's something that's like longer conversations and much more intensive listening as opposed to delivering a message.
All right, excellent. Next, we have Denise Lieberman and Jennifer Lohman. Do you want one or the other of you spotlighted, or?
I think Denise will go first with her portion, if that's okay, Denise.
Perfect.
All right, let me put the spotlight on you. There you go, thanks.
Hey, hi, everybody. Thanks so much for doing this program. I'm going to share my screen and try and get through some of this quickly. Oopsie. Hang on. I can't there we go. So we're here to talk about disinformation in voting. And what I'm going to try and do is kind of connect some of these concepts that you've learned today about how disinformation spreads to some of the tangible impacts that it's actually had on our access to the ballot and on frankly, the saliency of our democracy overall. And I don't need to tell any of you about the spate of disinformation in the voting and election space in recent years, but particularly, of course, going into the 2020 election cycle. And we're continuing to live with the fallout of that disinformation, including the big lie today, right? And so what we saw going into the elections in 2020 was everything from even sort of well-meaning but false misinformation, right? From people trying to say, oh, well, if you're concerned about postal delays, then just go take your mail-in ballot to your election authority on your own. Well, that didn't take into account that every state has different rules. And in Missouri, you couldn't return a mail ballot in person. It could only be returned by mail. So even well-meaning attempts to try to suggest ways that people could get around election issues sometimes ended up being false. But there was overt disinformation, of course, as well, even quite locally. You may remember your own mayor, Quinton Lucas, when he was turned away from the polls during the March presidential primaries. Missouri's Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft tried to undermine his experience, calling it false, saying that he was just trying to engage in a publicity stunt, right? To certainly the much more nefarious and notorious forms of disinformation, which is intentional, right? Spreading false information about the risks of voting by mail, the likelihood of fraud being attached to mail-in voting, which of course people were undertaking in record numbers because of the pandemic. And that disinformation about the security of mail-in voting had direct consequences on voters' experiences at the polls. It created the foundation for calling out poll watchers to intimidate voters at the polls, right? As a justification, by using this false narrative of voter fraud as a justification, right? And so you saw this intimidation and fear going into the election cycle, and the use of this false voter fraud narrative as a way to further engage people into the disinformation, to tangibly create barriers for voters to cast their ballot on election day. Certainly, that very same disinformation about the prevalence of voter fraud in the mail voting process led to an unprecedented number of lawsuits challenging the results, 62 lawsuits in all. Not one of them was successful, right? Seeking to overturn validly compiled election results in states around the country, in particular 6 battleground states. None of them were successful, but the constant surge of this narrative, of this false narrative, continued to take hold, and of course, led directly to an attack on our nation's capital on January 6th, the insurrection. And it didn't stop there. That narrative has continued to take hold and has been used to justify a record number of new laws introduced in 2021 to make voting harder, targeting the very practices that were the subject of the disinformation going into 2020. These new laws, 33 new laws already implemented in 2021 alone, 425 restrictive voting proposals targeting practices like voting by mail that were the subject of the disinformation, mandating, for example, stricter forms of voter identification to respond to this false narrative about voter fraud. And that's not all, right? Even though we were saved from any new laws passing in Missouri. These bills are queuing back up right here in Missouri for 2022. Again, based on this false information. Committee hearings that Missouri's House Elections Committee already held this year, recently at the end of August, were marked by a spate of the resurgence of this disinformation, including a 4-hour hearing where a lawmaker recounted her experiences attending Mike Lindell's cybersecurity conference that was intended to continue to proliferate the big lie and disinformation about voting. And then they use that information from that hearing to promote additional restrictive voting proposals in Missouri. So these things have very tangible consequences. That same narrative has continued to take hold and led to the further subversion and sabotaging of our elections systems. Most recently, the cyber ninjas false audit of Arizona's ballots were based on this justification, and attacks on election officials and election administration itself. You can see here, this is Brad Raffensperger. He's the Republican Secretary of State of Georgia, who, refused to buy into the big lie and the false narrative of voter fraud. And what you see on the side there are text messages. His wife actually received death threats. And this is a guy who supports Trump. He simply didn't buy into the big lie. And what that is creating is something that is incredibly dangerous to the future of our democracy. This disinformation is leading to not just a spate of new restrictive voting laws, but a delegitimization of our elections processes themselves. This is from Rick Hasen, who's an elections law expert and a leading national expert on voter fraud, right? And that's the very harmful consequence of this disinformation, the delegitimization of our elections. And you can see that in over 180 bills introduced in 2021 alone, targeting election officials, taking away their abilities to administer elections, even giving partisan state legislatures the ability to overturn election results themselves. In short, the big lie has led to legislation that changes who runs our elections and who counts the votes. And I'm not going to get into these bills, but they are incredibly dangerous, including right here in Missouri, legislation introduced in 2021 that would have allowed Missouri legislators to directly overturn election results that were certified by Missouri's election officials, right? And this has long-lasting harms on our democracy. I want to close by saying that there is legislation that can address some of this and some of the harmful impacts of this election-related disinformation. The Freedom to Vote Act, in addition to providing minimum levels of voter access that many of you are very familiar with, if you've been participating in the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition's calls, allowing same-day voter registration, early voting, it also makes disinformation illegal. It bans false and misleading information, and it works to prevent that election subversion by protecting election officials from those politically motivated reprisals that are based on that disinformation, right? And this is something that voters consistently show that they want across the board, Democrats, Republicans, and independents. So we ask that you join in yet another reason to urge your senators to pass the Freedom to Vote Act, and engage your friends and family with the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition's Anti-Disinformation Committee's holiday cards, which Jennifer may share further with you in a few moments. You can send them for Thanksgiving, you can send them for New Year's, and you can help promote a more civil and honest conversation around your holiday table this year. I will stop there. Thank you very much. And of course, join the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition's weekly meetings on Mondays at 10 to further engage in this work, and join the Anti-Disinformation Committee if this is of interest to you.
Thank you so much, Denise. And Jennifer, you had some final words?
Yes, I actually do need to screen share, and I will give you 7 steps that should help people that should help people better navigate and be able to avoid falling prey to or unintentionally spreading misinformation, disinformation, or manipulative content. I did want to say that for some reason I'm having a difficult time dropping links into the chat now. After I did one, it wouldn't take anymore. So if you're interested in those holiday cards, if somebody has the link from the Google Drive that they're in, please feel free to drop that into the chat, because you can get them, print them, send them to your friends and relatives. So I am going to bring up my presentation. Let's see. Okay, so here we go. I am going to present this. It is 7 steps to protect yourself and your loved ones against misinformation, disinformation, and manipulation. Now, the important thing about this is that, we need to be aware of the role that social media companies have played in this. And I think now that, Facebook has really been in the news, we know this better and for sure via their own internal documents. But social media companies get rich by making us angry and afraid, so we'll spend more time online. And in doing so, they're tearing us apart in a number of ways. This hurts us because it causes a spiral into extreme and polarized views that makes it impossible for people to find common ground. And most importantly, I think that without a shared understanding of the truth, we cannot engage in good decision-making on any level, either personally or as a society. And of course, on a more, personally, it's a polarization also leads to rifts between friends and family members, and just the personal emotional toll of this anger, fear, and conflict can be really significant and shouldn't be underestimated. But there are also, let's be really honest here, there are casualties to the war on truth, actual casualties, not just the threats to democracy, which are significant and existential in themselves, but there are, physical casualties. The highest number of casualties in any war in this country thus far has been the Civil War, 498,332. But the total US deaths from COVID, as of a couple days ago, were 758,500 and some, 588. That's a lot. That exceeds the number of deaths from the Spanish flu. And that's even after those deaths were, they went back with the Spanish flu and accounted for other deaths after it was all over. So, there could be more than 758,000 for all we know, but that's a really important number because that number is tied directly to our government policy and public attitudes that have been largely driven by disinformation and manipulation. If you look here, and this is an example I like to give, on March 15th, 2020, South Korea, which has a similar governmental structure and a much more densely populated nation, had 5 more people had died from COVID in South Korea than in the United States on that date. Today, they've had like a little over 3,000 people die from COVID. We've had 758,000. If the US death rate were the same as South Korea's proportionate to population, we would have lost 19,533 people. That is a lot less than 758,000. And it's really not even a matter of dispute that many of that 758,000 deaths were due to anti-masking, anti-shutdown, anti-vaccination policies that originated in disinformation and manipulated people into this frenzy where they actively resisted public health measures that have killed a lot of people. So when we say that, there is a war on truth and that disinformation is actually a battleground, it really is in the most literal sense. So the high level responses that we can take, you can deplatform bad actors, which does help. There can be political accountability for elected officials. I have seen no evidence of that occurring. Regulatory and legal accountability for platforms and bad actors, which could be a whole presentation in itself. There is no reason these companies cannot be regulated. There's no reason they can't suffer legal accountability for what they have done. I mean, for example, you saw the Facebook studies that showed that, they actually kind of increased suicidal thoughts in teenage girls. So, I mean, those are just the things that they internally investigated. There's also evidence, for example, that Facebook played a large role in a genocide, in another country. And it goes on and on. So there should be some regulation. There should be some legal accountability. And then there's also the idea of de-radicalization and inoculation messaging that can be helpful. Although I did see a study just yesterday out of Duke University, and this was something completely new to me, that examined why people believe in disinformation and who is most likely to spread disinformation. And what they finally found is it's not gullibility necessarily that causes people to do this. And it's not just confirmation bias either. It is something, I think they called it a lack of conscientiousness, meaning that the people who are the most likely to spread this stuff don't care if it's true or not. They literally don't care. What they're trying to do is cause chaos and division. And that's not just like the big folks who are creating this for those purposes. This is the individual end users of social media who share this stuff. They don't care whether it's true. They don't care whether it's been fact checked. They don't care what the truth is. They're spreading it because it serves their wider purpose of disruption. So, that part wasn't so great. And, maybe will lead to some rethinking of some of these steps. But for us, I think who are conscientious people, what those of us who are conscientious can do is, we can't solve the problem overall, but we can improve our own habits and reach out to other conscientious people we know to follow these steps. And this way, at least we won't fall prey to disinformation accidentally, and we won't spread it unintentionally. So the first thing is know your own vulnerability. I mean, knowing that you're being manipulated or lied to is the most important step toward resisting it. And I know that there's a sense that, this is something that kind of originates from or happens more with certain political views than others. That's not necessarily the case. It may be more prevalent with certain political views, but every single one of us has fallen prey to this kind of content, whether we know it or not. And we're certainly all affected by, the stress and conflict that it generates. So we've got to be really self-aware. We have to be as self-aware as we are judgmental when it comes to this stuff. That's not easy to do, but it's one of those things, give it some internal thought. So change your social media habits. Consider quitting social media. I mean, I think we've seen how harmful it is. You can save your content if you're worried about losing your memories. If you can't do it, never click on recommended content. If you have somebody who in your life who posts a great deal of problematic content, you can actually like ban the accounts that they're sharing from. You can, I can't think of the term I was using. Yeah, block those accounts. And that way you can remain friends with that person, but not see the content they're sharing from bad actors' accounts. Disable your notifications. And then also, if you're a parent, share these rules with your kids in a straightforward, non-judgmental way, because we're all vulnerable to this content regardless of age. And, they may have different vulnerabilities, but we all have vulnerabilities. Michele Steinberg was going to give a really good presentation about this. And if you're interested, not only can she do the presentation at another time, but if you go to knowdisinfo.org, that's KNOW disinfo.org, there is a page called Teens, Tweens, and Screens, where I have put up her presentation and you can take a look at it. So the other step is, avoid manipulative content. If you, as Gina showed, there are these accounts that tell these heartwarming stories and they get you sucked in and they get a lot of followers and they get a lot of engagement. And then eventually they'll start slipping in, really manipulative things like, hey, don't vote, or why would you want to be a part of a political system that doesn't care about you? There's no reason for you to vote, that kind of stuff, which, appeals to like genuine fears and doubts and questions that people have. But, ultimately they're trying to take away your power and influence you based on, your own kind of again, fears and weaknesses. You also have to be very skeptical at any time there's like an online debate that everybody's talking about. So there is a poster that a government agency puts out that's like, you know, how foreign interference works. And it's about the war on pineapple on pizza. And what they say is, you know, a couple people might be talking about that topic as, you know, kind of a joke online. But then, you know, a bunch of bots kind of get a hold of it and they start spreading it. And then people are like, oh my God, everybody's talking about pineapple on pizza, so I need to post about it too. This whole debate rages online. The news media picks it up, and suddenly everybody thinks that literally everybody in the United States cares about whether pineapple belongs on pizza, when that's not exactly the case. By the way, pineapple does belong on pizza. And if you think otherwise, you're wrong. Step 4, seek credible sources of information. And this is a little more challenging too than a lot of us might think. You also need to think about how your choices affect you in terms of stress and anxiety. There are a lot of commentary heavy stations with particular ideologies out there. And you know, there are some that appeal to the left, some that appeal to the right, but you have to consider how any kind of, you know, politically leaning content that you watch on TV then leads you to be more outraged and spend more time online and, you know, unnecessarily stressed out. So that's just something to think about when you're thinking about your own habits. You can also go to the News Literacy Project's checkology.org to take really great classes in media literacy. It's good. It's definitely worth your time. I found them extremely difficult, but also very illuminating. So you can try that. The News Literacy Project also has some other standalone tools and quizzes that are quite good. You can address media bias by reading stories from 3 perspectives side by side to compare them by using allsides.org. And that way you can kind of see where your biases line up for one thing, but also how people are hearing radically different things about the same topic, depending on where they're getting their news. And I think that's a really important thing for people to be aware of. Fact checking is also important for yourself. So you're not doing this so you can win online debates or anything, or convince somebody else that they're wrong. This is for you so that you know, and you can check information for yourself. And this is a list of fact check organizations that were endorsed by the News Literacy Project. So again, News Literacy Project is amazing. Check them out very thoroughly. You also need to have your vulnerabilities exposed. You know, you can watch The Brainwashing of My Dad, which I think Debbie Kitchen mentioned, and then there is going to be a Brainwashing of My Dad event at the Novel Neighbor on December 1st, I believe, because the movie has now become a book. Other videos are The Social Dilemma and Trust Me, which some of you watched last Tuesday with me. Both of those are really good. It shows, explores vulnerability through social media, media literacy, and the consequences of disinformation. I highly recommend all 3 of these documentaries. So mistakes we all make, just remember that just because something's a verified social media account means the person's famous. It doesn't mean they're trustworthy. The biggest thing I think people need to be aware of is the blue check users online who are monetizing sociopolitical upheaval, fear, and anger by providing content that rallies their target audience. And I would say that, an example of this is like the hashtag resistance accounts on Twitter and other places where they've kind of made a living out of rallying people with similar political views, even though they don't necessarily have particular qualifications. And the monetization of that kind of thing really, leads one to wonder whether they're being entirely accurate. So just be really wary of those. And I've already addressed, being more aware of the stuff that you choose to find your news from, because that can affect your well-being. So step 5 is beware what you share online. Always err on the side of not sharing content. Don't share memes, cool photos, or video. They're, half of them are lies, even from those history accounts. The shark on the highway photo that gets brought out with every hurricane, still not real. Links, articles, forwarded or reshared posts, copy and paste posts, which are the biggest red flag ever, or any other potentially problematic content. And this is related to, but not entirely the same as our most important rule, and that is never engage with misinformation, disinformation, or manipulative content. Don't reply to it, don't share it, don't put an emoji on it, don't, retweet it, quote tweet, comment on, just don't engage with the content at all, even to disagree with it or fact check it. You may think that you're doing a great service by pointing out the truth on one of these posts, but the truth really is that you are just amplifying that post and making sure that more people see it in their news feeds, and you're increasing the reach of the original disinformation. So just don't do it. No matter how tempted you are, no matter how outrageous it is, don't do it, because it actually does more harm than good. So because any repetition or boosting of this amplifies it, and it can also lend credibility to it, because if you're arguing with it, then you kind of get into that false equivalence space where people are thinking, well, if it's important enough for so and so to put this much time into debunking it, there must be something to it. These are all things that operate on a psychological basis, but ultimately you just don't want more people to share that post or see that post, so just don't engage with it. What you can do instead is report any problematic content to the platform, which may or may not do anything about it, as well as reportdisinfo.org, which is a site where they collect disinformation and decide on a kind of an expert basis how best to combat it. If you're concerned about a friend or relative posting it, handle it privately in a direct message, email, or in person. The News Literacy Project had a really great seminar last week on how to have those difficult conversations with friends and relatives. And I will try to find some of that content and add it to this presentation going forward. But they really had some good techniques for approaching somebody in a way that's not going to automatically make them defensive. What you can also post truthful information instead. So you can learn more about effective messaging from some of the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition's partners. Denise can tell you more about that, but you can post proactive messaging in a way, as long as you don't mention the disinformation as well. So you can say, here's some great things about how elections work, without referring to the fact that people are questioning elections. And that can be super helpful. And that also brings us to step 7, which is, spend your time engaging in proactive and productive activities, not trying to chase down disinformation or respond to it, but things that are really going to make a difference in an affirmative, proactive way. If you'd like to know more about disinformation, do go to the website knowdisinfo.org. Again, it's KNOW disinfo.org. And also, stay informed about voting rights issues and actions you can take to help by joining the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition. I'm sure everybody here is a member. If you don't get their emails, text MOVPC to 66866 to join. If you don't text, you can also email info@movpc.org. And I'm going to so here's the 7-step summary, which I will send around as a screenshot, but I'm going to go in. Oh, and here are also all the things that we have in that same Google Drive that Denise mentioned earlier. We have flyers, we have the New Year's cards. We also have something that's cool called a zine. One of my kids learned how to make these, so I made one. And I guess it's this really awesome thing where you can do a whole flyer, print it on one sheet of paper, and then just fold it in this intricate way to make a booklet. So, kind of fun and really less expensive than a lot of ways to duplicate information. But what I know that the one topic that you guys also wanted to hear about was critical race theory. And so as a spotlight in manipulation, I'm going to talk quickly about critical race theory. So, though it's mostly taught in law schools, like other theoretical frameworks, it's just, it's typically to organize research and evaluate our systems and laws against a framework of the understanding that a lot of what we have in this country is driven by racism. And that's kind of baked into our laws and systems. So critical race theory is a real thing. It's a legitimate thing. It is something that is, pursued on a, higher education, scholarly level. And again, it's kind of mostly a law school thing. But, people are having an absolute cow about critical race theories in school. And this is manipulation. It's not disinformation, because critical race theory is a real thing. It's just not correctly contextualized in this instance. But, it was deliberately brought up as a manufactured conflict by somebody who, learned something about the concept and thought, here's something I can really exploit to, appeal to racism. I mean, this is just a, dog whistle politics kind of thing. And it was a deliberately invented conflict. And it doesn't, see here, it's like CRT is being used as a shorthand for anti-racist education of any kind, including basic facts about history. So, and it's rapidly infected so much of the country because it involves that direct appeal to racism, which always works. Anti-racist education does involve truths that directly challenge widely held belief systems and societal structures that are steeped in white supremacy. And this is because, the most widespread disinformation campaign in American history may well be the way that history is traditionally taught in schools. And not to put too fine a point on it, but US history, as many of us learned it, is a mythology that covers up the underlying racism, colonialism, misogyny, xenophobia, whatever in our history. I mean, we have, really made people in history into heroes who were decidedly not heroes, and everything is more complex than it seems. And there's a lot of ugliness in American history that shouldn't be denied. So instead of fearing that truth, we need to actively be challenged by it and re-examine how we look at things. Thanksgiving is a great time to do that because, I mean, if there is a bigger mythological holiday, I don't know what is Thanksgiving. And think about that, except maybe Columbus Day, which shouldn't even be a thing. So the effects of this, it has inflamed anger and resentment among people who consciously or unconsciously hold white supremacist views. It's just been absolutely bonkers. There has led to a flurry of legislation banning critical race theory education and perhaps by extension, any lesson plans addressing racism or giving an anti-racist point of view. So here are the states where things have been passed and or introduced into the legislature. And of course, Missouri is among them. Officials are banning books addressing race from curricula and from libraries themselves. And they are also going to, expand that beyond just race-based things, but many of them are directly involved in race, which include classics as well as, the more timely and my personal favorite book, The Hate U Give, which if you haven't read, it's a young adult novel, but it's really good and I highly recommend it. Educators, administrators, school board members have been harassed, stalked, threatened, and fired. That's happened in our own area in Missouri. Especially in, the St. Louis area, in Rockwood school districts. I mean, things have gotten really ugly and it is frightening. And politicians and elected officials have either exploited this, critical race theory rage for electoral gain, which, happened in Virginia for sure, or they've tiptoed around it because they're afraid of offending people who held those racist views. And that happens everywhere. And that is definitely, I don't even know if you'd call it like a both sides thing, but there's a lot of that going on. And that is definitely not the way to address it. You can't tiptoe around this. So this manipulation, has inflamed this. It's also helped reinforce the opposition to voting rights and fair maps because, it gets into this, it coalesces and empowers opposition to anything that involves racial equity. And a lot of attacks on voting rights, involve attacks on racial equity. So being outraged about this makes it a lot easier to rally opposition to these things. So how should we address this effectively if we're talking about, pushing back on this manipulation? Simply explaining that critical race theory is not actually taught in K through 12 that's not an effective response to this for two reasons. First, when you emphasize the fact that critical race theory is not taught in grade schools, while it's true, it also wrongly implies that there's something wrong with teaching anti-racism to children. And instead, we should be advocating for our children to be educated through an anti-racist lens. And second, the truth simply doesn't matter to the people who are engaging in this manipulation or the people who are receptive to it. It's this catch-all term that people can use to express racist ideas and advocate for racist practices, using in what their minds sounds like a euphemism or a really professional sounding label, where they can say, oh, well, I'm just concerned about my child's education. Nah, you're just engaging in racist dog whistle politics. I mean, and that's just a fact. So that is definitely not the way to deal with it. The only way to deal with critical race theory, and the only way to push back on it, is to actively embrace and advocate for anti-racist education and promote anti-racist views in general. Don't shy away from that. Don't apologize for it. Don't tiptoe around it for fear of offending people who are falling prey to this manipulation. That's probably, a half-hearted pushback is almost worse than no pushback at all. So people need to engage in a really full-throated defense of anti-racist education and promoting anti-racist views in schools and everywhere else. That's the effective way to counteract this manipulation. And that is, I think, the end of my presentation. And we are going to Q&A if there's any time for it.
Oh, thank you so much to all our presenters. I'm sure that there are a lot of questions. I know I have myself. So feel free to unmute yourself, raise your hand if you have a question. And I'm going to try to unspotlight you. So there we go. Okay. So yeah, Laura, Marcus Mountjoy, you have a question.
Yes. So what was the blue check that was referred to both in the reported program and just recently too? The blue check,
so,
put this in the chat also.
Yeah. So the blue check is
before.
Yeah, so the blue check, when you go on a site like Facebook or mostly Twitter, I think is where they primarily see the blue check. I can't even remember how they designate official accounts on Facebook right now. But if you have like accounts that have been verified, meaning that they've verified the identity of the person behind the account, and they're considered of great enough public interest to go through that verification process, you get a blue check next to your name. On Twitter. So if you see usernames on Twitter and one has a blue check next to it, that means the person's account is verified, but it's only verified insofar as they verify that, yes, this is the real person. And yes, they have some claim to fame or otherwise a broad social media reach. It has nothing to do with their credibility or propensity to tell the truth. But a lot of people feel like the blue check confers some, magic status on these users, and it really doesn't.
Okay.
And have they figured out a way to fabricate that blue check?
Some people do try. You can't totally fabricate the blue check, and if you're savvy enough, you can always spot people who try. Like they make a username and then they add that symbol into their username or something like that to try to create the appearance of a blue check. But if you're really paying attention, yeah, you can't fake the blue check, but the blue check doesn't really mean anything about your trustworthiness anyway.
Sandy, you had a question?
Well, I'm just curious, how is this sort of approach to disinformation being taught in schools? To what extent does this make its way through elementary and secondary education?
Well, the question is, does it? Critical thinking skills are super important. Media literacy is super important. I don't think that's something that is taught in all schools. I personally remember, being educated in a lot of these things back in the 1970s in the elementary school I went to in Iowa. We really talked about propaganda and propaganda techniques, but I can't say that my own children have received the same, instruction at school, although they have at home. So it's something that should be addressed in schools, and educators really need to address it. there are so many resources out there for educators, including the News Literacy Project, which has actually a curriculum that can be used across several grade levels, where you have not only basic lesson plans, but also specific case studies for kids. And so I would really recommend anybody who's involved in education to take a look at that and advocate for that type of education in their schools.
Say that URL again.
It's the News Literacy Project. And I think, I don't know what the exact, I think it's like newslit.org. But
Yes, that's it.
is that, yeah, so it's newslit.org.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I
Dawn,
can also add to that, as a recently retired American history teacher, there is not any set curriculum, at least this is the district that I was in, was a public district here in suburban St. Louis, set curriculum, but both our communication arts department and our social studies department taught media literacy and how to evaluate, I mean, in history especially, how to evaluate information. I mean, even information that's given in the textbook, because, you know, it's all written from a perspective and you can't always take it for exactly what they say. There's always another side to the story. So you know, teachers are taking it upon themselves to try to teach kids to critically think and help them figure out how to do that.
okay, we have a question from Donna and then one from Reva.
I also had heard that like suffragists and gender is also part of the on the list not to teach. Is that, have you heard that also?
I mean, it's certainly the topic of some of the books that have been banned. And I think it really, you know, this does just kind of, you know, expand into an ideology where they have a framework that they want to, you know, keep education focused on, you know, white male oriented kind of focus, where we keep the reputations of the founding fathers, you know, intact in their mythological aspect and that type of thing. So yeah, I mean, obviously if they're banning things like The Handmaid's Tale, it's a whole scope of things that is being talked about. But you know, the primary driver of all of that is always going to be racism.
Yeah.
Have you guys heard, and this is from the League of Women Voters here in St. Louis, their education committee has been, are talking about this Missouri Parents Bill of Rights and this education freedom pledge. Have you guys heard anything about that? Let me just read this pledge to you. It says, I pledge to support policies that promote parental rights in education and educational freedom. This includes the right of parents to voice their opinions at school board meetings and to take their child's taxpayer-funded education dollars to the education providers of their choosing, whether it be public or private, charter or homeschool. And there's a huge list of Missouri, you know, state elected officials, including the Secretary of State and more, that have, you know, signed on to this, which just distresses me to no end.
All right, Reva.
Well, just a comment to that, Julie, is that it's not their tax money, it's everybody's tax money. So they really don't have the right to decide that, but that's just a comment. My question was to, I think Jennifer, when they were talking about banning these books from, you know, people reading them, is there also a charge to ban these books from public libraries? Is there pressure on public library systems to ban these books also?
Oh, sure. I mean, this is something that's not only school libraries and school curricula, but it's also public libraries. I mean, it's just bonkers when people start talking about banning books, and particularly when they're talking about banning things that are considered classics. I mean, this is a perennial problem, you know, every so often that people get into a knot about certain types of literature or things that they find ideologically objectionable. But this is pretty crazy. They are really trying to ban books that are, I mean, absolute classics. And, you know, it's, again, it's kind of all part of this, I guess I would call it, you know, like this white rage, this backlash, this, dog whistle politics kind of thing that has absolutely poisoned our entire history and continues to do so, and really right now poses an incredibly grave threat to democracy, because when people are angry, they're more likely to do irrational things and believe irrational things and fall into a mindset where they're, perhaps even capable of committing acts of violence in service of what they believe. So yeah, it's fairly terrifying.
Well, I think what really angers me is I feel like saying to these parents, okay, I won't pay any more taxes then to support the public schools. I have no children in school. Why should I be paying taxes? So you can say that about libraries. It's like, look, these libraries are supported by public tax money, of which I happen to be a taxpayer. So that just is always something I think about when they start, throwing around this stuff about we're going to ban books from library because of our kids. Well, they don't have to go there, but it's my library too. So it's just, again, going on what Julie said too about, these parents saying, I'm going to take out my tax money. Well, go right ahead, because the rest of us can too.
Well, the funny thing about all of this, though, is that, all these parents who are so hell bent on banning these books, number one, should be thrilled their kids are walking into a library to check out a book. And number two, seem not to understand that those same children are carrying around phones 24/7 that provide access to a lot more disturbing content than they're going to find in any library. Although parents, many of those same parents would say that they control what their kid sees online, I'm here to tell you that is not true.
Yeah. I just wanted to throw in, the attacks on libraries are sort of, I think, less likely to be successful and less salient than the attacks on our schools. The librarians have a history of very, very significant activism against censorship. I mean, we saw that, these attacks on what we read and see are perennial, right? And we saw huge efforts after 9/11, for example, to ban books in libraries, and the librarians were the most stalwart and prolific folks that stepped up to fight those things. So, beware when you start attacking the librarians, but I do think that you're likely to see this continue to play out in the school setting.
Well, I know we're running a little bit over, but if you'll answer just one more question from me, I wanted to know a little bit more about the ban on misinformation or disinformation that is part of the Freedom to Vote Act. Denise, could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and thanks for that question. Yeah, I mean, the Freedom to Vote Act, as many of you know who been participating in the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition's calls, is a massive piece of legislation, and it has kind of three kind of big chapters, one of which relates to voter access and stopping voter suppression. And one of those provisions, there's provisions that strengthen existing laws against voter intimidation. So federal law already prohibits voter intimidation, but this would strengthen that. And as part of that, there's some additional language that actually makes misinformation, promulgating inaccurate information about voting illegal. So it's part of that piece of the law.
And would that apply to candidates as well as, is that just broadly worded to apply to anyone who?
Yes.
Information? Okay, that's
big... I mean, because what it does is expressly includes this kind of purveyance of false information within the things that are illegal. So for right now, for example, in Missouri, it's illegal to interfere with the elections process. It's illegal to intimidate voters. It's illegal to coerce voters, and you can make a supposition that spreading false information about voting constitutes that. The Freedom to Vote Act makes it explicit that it does.
Gotcha.
And there have been situations even now where, under the kind of laws that Denise mentioned that already exist, where people have been, charged with offenses relating to lying to voters. There was one disinformation agent who put out a bunch of videos about, telling people to text Hillary to something, in order to cast your ballot for her. And he was actually brought up on charges not too long ago. So, you know, there already are means to limit this kind of thing, but this, as Denise said, makes it really clear and applies nationwide.
Okay, well, one more quick question from Laura, and then we're just gonna. We could talk about this all day, but we'll have to quit. So, Laura.
And I know we could, but because the league is first and foremost all about voter access and voter education, Denise, can you give us a hopeful ending to where we are with the Freedom to Vote Act? I think we're all feeling a little bit better that 2 of Biden's initiatives have been passed that will help all Americans. And that was not a political thing. That is aimed towards helping Americans. So where are we with the Freedom to Vote Act and its passage?
Yeah, I'll be quick on this because I know we're short on time. And feel free to join the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition's weekly meetings on Monday for more on this. So yeah, you know, Congress has a lot on their plates, but you know, they're slowly but surely making their way through the list, right? So we got the Build Back Better finally done. They're going to go on break for Thanksgiving. When they come back, they're going to have to also, in addition to the voting rights pieces, deal with the debt ceiling, reconciliation. So they still have other things on their plates. I mean, it does seem that the pressure continues to mount for voting rights. You are now finally seeing the Biden administration stepping in to say that these are important priorities. What we know is that, like with many of these bills, it's not going to pass unless they reform the rules around the filibuster. Right now, a minority of senators can basically wage just a abject veto to even have a discussion about the legislation. Reforming the filibuster is not as difficult as it sounds. It is simply a matter of will. It would take the act of the 50 senators to do it, because the vice president has a tie-breaking vote. You currently have all 50 senators on record as supporting the Freedom to Vote Act, all 50. So if they are going to put their money where their mouth is and believe that this is worthy of at minimum a conversation, then they can reform the rules regarding the filibuster, even to just require it to be a talking filibuster. And we saw the other night that they got the ability to speak for 8 hours. You know, even that would dissuade and prevent that kind of line item, kind of abject like blockage to the debate. So, I mean, you know, how do we do that? We can just continue to keep the pressure on. Having pressure from the Biden administration is important to this. As grassroots folks on the ground, we have these conversations, you know, we continue to talk about this. I want to promote again those Thanksgiving cards. I think they're really cool. We heard on the call last week, some people are going to use them not just to mail, but like use them as little place cards for their Thanksgiving tables. And, you know, it's kind of a way to open up a conversation. And the more that folks like us are just having these conversations, the more it stays in the public eye, the more it stays in, you know, on the front burner.
And I will tell you that here in Kansas City, Alice Kitchen has a whole bunch of those cards on her front porch. So if you're a member, you can log into the website, check the roster for her address, and go by and get some. They're just in a box there for anyone to take. She would love it.
And can we take a minute to thank Jennifer Lohman, who designed those cards, and since she's
yes, absolutely. I also want to take more than a minute to thank all of you who came and presented. It was such a great presentation. Thank you so much. We learned so much, and we will take your message out into our communities too, so that we can help stop the spread of misinformation and disinformation. So thank you so much to all of our presenters. I want to name every one of them. Julie, Gina, Dr. Gina McLendon, Caroline Fan, Debbie Kitchen in absentia, Denise Lieberman, Jennifer Lohman. Julie Burchett. I want to include her last name too. So thank you. Big round of applause. I know it was such an interesting topic. I'm going to keep the meeting open for anyone who wants to stay for about another 15 or 20 minutes. But the meeting is adjourned. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. We'll go forth and multiply.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Jean, did you have a question? I saw your hand up earlier, and I'm sorry we didn't get to it.
Yeah, and I'll stick around to answer questions if anybody else has any more.
Jean, did you have a question? I think you might be on mute.
He's probably finding unmute.
I did not. That was an accident, but thanks for the wonderful program. Thanks a bunch.
Laura has a question.
Well, I have a comment. I put in the chat that there is a publication. It's called The Little Blue Book. It's by George Lakoff, and I may have left off an F from his name. And I recommend this to people. It is actually partisan. It's supposed to be helping Democrats talk to Republicans or speak to Republican issues. But I find that it's very nonpartisan and that it helps you reframe how you talk with people. And I actually used the techniques when I did my very first door-to-door canvassing for a candidate a couple of years ago. And it's basically, you know, I'm really concerned that my family has access to good medical care. Is that a concern of yours? I'm really concerned that that my neighbors and I and all Americans have a say in our government. Is that a concern of yours? And it takes away the whole partisan, I'm this, you're that. It's hey, we are all human and we're all concerned for our families and we're all concerned as Americans